Welcome to Blue Monday with me, Dave and Roger, as ever. Before we get going, if you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe, give us a like and leave a comment. And if you're listening on a podcast, please do the same. And if you're not on the Patreon yet, go and have a look at Patreon, see if you want to sign up for that. That'll be good too. Right, football. So, no Everton, obviously, but the Club World Cup, easy for me to say, is in full swing. And we had an absolute mismatch last night, where Bayern Munich beat a team from Auckland 10-0. Feels like a bit of a vanity project and a bit of a waste of time to me. I have absolutely no interest in it at all. But it comes around to the thing for me, like we touched upon this on the weekly, there's a bit too much football for me at the minute, and it's something that I'll pick up in a minute, but the PFA thinks so too. That's the Professional Footballers Association. We're actually joining legal action against FIFA for abuse of power for introducing this new World Club Cup competition that no one really asked for, and I don't know if anyone wants. Dave, I'll come to you first. What are your thoughts on it? Have you been interested in it? Will you be interested in it?
And aside from a work capacity, then not really. Although probably going to sound a bit silly about this, but I generally do get to the odd years, as in the odd numbered years, where there's no tournament on. I know there is now, isn't there, with the Euros typically? Is that right? The Euros are on odd years now. Is that because of what happened with COVID?
Euros, isn't it? No, I think the Euros is still the even years in between, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still
1 year from COVID.
Next Euros is 2028. I'm right saying that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're thinking the Nations League finals. They do in the odd years, don't they?
And you, Roger,
whatever that even is.
You've just hit the nail on the head there, Roger, because we can talk about. We've just spoken about 3 different tournaments in the space of 30 seconds that go on across the summer. Look, I mean, it's another one, isn't it, to throw bagfuls of cash towards sides that have the do or do not, and these sides clearly have the do. What is there, $1 billion sort of split between them all, and obviously, like the winning side gets more than everybody else more. And I was, that 10-0 one. That's actually an amateur side, aren't they, from New Zealand?
Yeah,
who were
Auckland
playing
City.
in ridiculous. I mean, I was reading quite deeply on it, and obviously, I think the funny thing about it is it's exactly how the World Cup should be. The 32 with 8 groups, 32, the way it used to be. Not now, where you can basically have to be not there so you don't qualify for the knockout rounds. But you look at some of the fixtures. I mean, last night I was vaguely interested in Atletico Madrid against PSG, but I still feel as if these are what should be glorified friendlies. Much the same way you mentioned there with the Nations League. But this stage of a season and getting into the summer, these type of games should not be different to what we've always had, and that is everybody goes and has the holidays, the players sort of relax, get their energy back, and then you come back in mid to late July, and then you start kicking on for the new campaign. And I think that what I would like to think, and obviously because we're Blues here, is that there should be an advantage to those who don't have this shite across the summer and those who come back into the Premier League. Now, we're notoriously slow starters, aren't we, to the Premier League sides? I'm looking at today's fixtures there. What have we got? The MLS is still going, funnily enough. But if you look at the game, like yesterday, they had Messi was playing, wasn't he?
That was the opening game. It finished 0-0.
Shocker.
Just another thing on that as well. The way Inter Miami qualified was basically just to have Lionel Messi playing in Infantino's flagship tournament, wasn't it? It's just a vanity thing for me, because they've got such a convoluted way of like having teams qualify. Inter Miami still didn't qualify, but the world's best player, most famous player, arguably, had to be in there. So they just put Inter Miami in. It's just a bit of a farce for me.
Well, they're throwing in when they're trying to ship Ronaldo into it somehow as well. Saudi-wise, they were trying to get him somewhere, so he was there to be the poster boy for it and all that sort of thing. And then, you're right there, Roger, that 0-0 game, which I did see quite a lot of, and they missed the penalty, Al Ahly as well, the Egyptian champions. I thought to start a game like that, and obviously it was because it was in Miami, and it's obviously the tournament's taking place in the States. I did a wry smile looking at it, thinking, "Is this what you've paid for? Is this what you want? Are you entertaining?" Kind of thing. Of Gladiator. When you've got an organisation there who are deciding to, as desperately as possible, get the 6 confederations to all play in a tournament in and amongst each other, when each confederation, like obviously we have the Champions League, they have their various versions of that in each of the confederations. Who really needs more than that? Does anybody really need more than that, especially against the quality of sides they're going to be, which will be at different levels? Obviously, and I can't remember who I was talking to yesterday about this because I spoke to a lot of people about it. We're looking at the European teams in that. I'd be astonished if the finalists are not 2 European sides, and that shows you the difference between what we're actually watching here. There's group stage matches, there's last 16 matches. You're not going to get Auckland, who's basically like us 4 going for a game at a 5-a-side, the equivalent of that against professional Premier League sides and the European champions and everything like that you see in the Champions League. So it's certainly not for me. But I understand that people want more football. It's the famous David Mitchell thing about football, isn't it? It's like that.
Live.
Yeah, there's football tonight. If you can't make it tonight, there's football tomorrow. All of that sort of thing. It's not for me, and it's a bit infuriating, really. I mean, I'm not a fan of international football, but I do like it when the World Cup's on, because the World Cup's all right for it fills in a summer when there's not an Ashes on, for instance, which we're lucky enough for it to be coming up in this winter. Things like that vary sport anyway. I don't know whether it's because I'm getting older, but I do prefer a bit of a break from it. I don't know what you guys think.
For me, it was always the case that the season would finish and you'd have like a major tournament once every 2 years. There'd be a little bit of a wait until that tournament. There'd be a build up to that. You'd have the tournament, then there'd be a little bit of a wait until the build up to the Premier League season with a few friendlies thrown in. And I think that expectation for me has kind of been taken away. You don't get the chance to build up too much because we've basically gone from the end of the season straight into this tournament, which, don't get me wrong, there are some like decent looking games like that you would never see, like Boca Juniors, Benfica, Fluminense v Dortmund. There are some good teams there that probably would like to see. But I think from my perspective, Rog, I'm loath to be sympathetic to professional footballers who are paid a hell of a lot of money, but it does feel to me like they're getting flogged. And I'll come on to some quotes from the PFA about this because I think they're spot on. Just look at it from that point of view. If players are getting no break, surely we're not going to get the best out of them in the domestic season, which is, that's what we pay to see. That's the most important thing. They're not going to be at the best, are they, if they're playing all summer with no break and going straight into the new season?
No, I think you're right. I mean, this is a silly competition because there are too many teams in it. I think it would be much more entertaining if the qualification criteria had been clearer, and if there'd been some kind of knockouty type stuff between the Egyptians and the Mexicans and the New Zealand team and maybe the Saudi team, and then let's say the top 4 from Europe and the top 4 from South America went in, and then you had sort of the round of 16, and it was straight knockout from there. It's difficult to have sympathy. I mean, look, if I'm Liverpool, which thankfully I'm not, or if I'm Arsenal, I'm rubbing my hands here because City and Chelsea are going to be absolutely knackered. It's no good. This is no good for City. I mean, Chelsea have got about 47 players, so they'll be okay. They can have an entirely different squad, but they're going to be absolutely knackered. These players coming back, they're not going to get maybe 2 weeks off if they're lucky. So I think it puts teams that aren't competing in this, in their domestic leagues, Barcelona, for example, in Spain, they're not in this. They've got the summer off, and say Liverpool, Arsenal have got a proper clear summer to their players to rest and get their transfer business done. But of course, players are very, very well paid, and how long do they need off? A winter break? The clubs themselves, they're going off. Look at Man United going off to Malaysia or wherever they went the day after and got beaten Hong Kong or something, which was quite funny. So the clubs want to monetize them themselves, and I can't help thinking, how would we feel if we'd qualified for this? If back in the day, remember when we were talking to Gav, Les, about in the 80s, and Everton were one of the big five, the big four,
Yeah.
the big three. The millionaires. We set up the Premier League. Philip Carter was instrumental in that. And if we'd qualified for this, would do you think we'd be taking people over to go and see us against Monterey or something? We'd have been taking loads of fans over. I don't know. How would we feel if we were part of it? Is some of our attitude because we're on the outside looking in? That's just my question. Rather than actually being in amongst it. But I think the real winners are Liverpool and Arsenal, which is quite disappointing, really.
Yeah, definitely. I think Dave, just from a player's point of view, so I've been reading up on this for once, and basically a study of 70 medical and performance experts reckon that professional players have at least 4 weeks off every summer in order to avoid burnout, plus 4 weeks of pre-season training before the new campaign, which sounds sensible to me. And I think this is why the PFA have sort of gone into this legal action against FIFA. So a quote from Maheta Malango, hope I've got that right, who's the chief exec of the PFA, has said some players are heading into post and pre-season competitions before another full campaign that ends with yet another major tournament. It's a never-ending football calendar, and without a meaningful break, it's simply not sustainable. And that's the worry for me with not necessarily with Everton players, because we haven't got this schedule, but it's just going to impact the overall quality of the game, isn't it? And the overall quality of these players, if they're not getting any rest and they're going into these tournaments and they're getting flogged, and there's a lot of money being made. This money is getting held by however many clubs are involved in this closed shop at the top. I just don't think any of it's good for football in any way at all.
Well, just firstly, I'm being quite cynical here, but you wouldn't be saying this, and you wouldn't be getting 70 physical experts to look at this if it was a PFA / Premier League group stage summer billionaire tournament. And I think that the problem lies in there, doesn't it? It's the kind of thing you look at and think, well, I wish we'd have thought of this, because it gets the exposure worldwide. And look, the Premier League doesn't really need that, does it? But there'd still be money to be made somewhere from the Premier League, and again to have the clubs that are winning leagues and titles, and they're always going to be in the Champions League side earning more money rather than anyone else. I mean, I think we've spoken a few times how the promoted sides from the Premier League to the Premier League, the gap between them and the Premier League is probably as wide as it's ever been. I mean, we've looked at it. I mean, the last 2 seasons, the promoted 3 have gone down.
Yeah.
I was looking, and maybe Leeds have a chance, but you could see it happening again. What's that do for your regular fan who supports a club? And obviously you're going ballistic, like Sunderland would have been going nuts. They probably still are partying the fact that they've come up. Yet, lads, I hope to be. I don't want to be negative towards you lads, but you're going to have to go some to stay in the league, and that's the way it is with it. The other interesting thing that I found out was those teams like Chelsea and a couple of other sides, I can't remember the players who they've brought in, have been desperate to get the transfer completed, so they were able to send them to this tournament. And I think I was listening to Lee Carsley, who was editing his interview the other day. I think he was talking about Liam Delap, who is not at the under-21s, and he's gone to this. And he was asked about it, and he said, "Oh, we expected it anyway." So clearly, he's going to be having not an input, but he's basically going to have been told who is not going to be going to an international tournament. Now, if you look at your players there that you've just signed, and sadly Chelsea don't have this issue because they've got about 500 players there that they can play in any competition. But others, if you're looking at you're in a position to, or do you know what, lads? Say if it was us, let's just use us as an example. If we're in this, Everton are going to take it seriously because we don't have the financial clout of clubs in the Premier League, in the Champions League. So we look at it and think, well, do you know what? If this is the only way to get an extra few quid in, so we can start building the squad and everything else we need, then absolutely we're going to go there. But then you look at the players that you're bringing through. Let's go for Branthwaite, who can still play for the under-21s. Let's go for whoever, any of our younger players, any of our under-21 players. Would you rather have them going and running the bollocks off into the ground at a prestigious, in inverted commas, tournament, or would you like to see them actually progress at the international level and go with the under-21s? And I had real sympathy with Lee Carsley, because what's he to say? He's sitting there doing this job. He had the England job, didn't he, for a few games? He's trying to progress as a manager, yet he can't go into a pool of players and select them because their clubs have taken them in the summer to a tournament that nobody really wants. And the other thing as well about it, just a final touch on why I'm so critical of this, is the fact that it's the United States. Nothing against the United States, but the United States have the World Cup with the other two countries. They have a growing fan base. It's something that and I think correctly, because you have to these days, we're going over to the States in a couple of weeks for a few games and try and sell the Everton product, which we should have been doing a long, long time ago. We've been massively way behind everybody else who goes and does that. So I think there needs to be a more intelligent way of thinking of how you go and market yourselves over there. Chelsea don't need to do it. Manchester City probably need to do it because they're still relatively the new boys to a global fan base. Yet they'll still be getting on board with it. They'll still be getting that's still going to be growing. If you were to get that statistically, there'd be more Manchester City fans now than there were 10 years ago, let's say. So that's the only way where I get a perspective from clubs themselves. But in general, you're taking billionaires over there, billionaire clubs, and making them, well, potentially more billionaires. And everybody else has to basically think, well, do you know what? We need to try and qualify for this, but the gap's becoming even more.
Yeah. Do you reckon, Rog, this does just exacerbate the haves and the have-nots? We're moving to this new ground in the summer, and it's sort of like, in some ways, the way the club are talking, it feels like it's going to be a silver bullet. That's it. We've hit the big time again, which is completely untrue because, like you always say, we need a good team on the park before we can do anything like that. But it's like this new ground is going to put us on a better footing to compete with the clubs around us. We can't reach that sort of stratospheric level that these clubs can because they've got this tournament, they've got the Champions League, and I think until you break into that, I mean, you can't compete on that level. You look at Liverpool are signing attacking midfielder for £116 million. That's probably going to be the best part of our entire summer budget if we're lucky. Do you think this just makes things worse, and do you think football's just becoming maybe more of a closed shop for that?
I don't actually. No, I really don't. I think that let them go and flog themselves in America, because the thing that matters, the most important thing that matters, is domestic league positioning, because that leads you to the Champions League or the Europa League, and the Europa League could in turn lead you into the Champions League. So the most important games that we play are the 38 games that we play in the league. And of course, other clubs have more money to spend, and sometimes they spend it wisely, sometimes they piss it up against the wall. Nottingham Forest have shown last season what is achievable if things click and you make some good, astute signings. Aston Villa and Newcastle even have been in Champions League. Newcastle now for second year in 3 or 4. Villa unlucky to lose out again. Villa got through to the knockout stages. And yes, of course, that stadium is important. And if we have a winning team and an entertaining team, then we'll fill it and we'll get more sponsorship and we'll get more commercial revenue. And everything starts with the football. Everything starts with the players, whether they're bought or developed by yourself. And just because these big clubs are going off to play silly games at silly times of the night in silly locations, let them have it. Because this isn't clear. This is a random group of clubs they've put together, and it won't exist in this format forever because, it makes no sense that Barcelona aren't in it. It makes no sense that Liverpool aren't in it or that Arsenal aren't in it. It makes very little sense, some of the teams that are there, but let them. And what we need to be doing is getting our house in order and getting our squad ready because, somebody sent me a list. I think I shared it with you guys. We've only got 16 players. Come on.
Yeah, we'll come on to that now.
No rush, but we need some players and let's get some good ones and then we can be competitive because, of course, we don't have European football. I think Man United are excited not to have European football because it's going to give them a chance to... There are 6 teams in the Champions League. They're there for the taking if you play them the Saturday after. Great opportunities for... Next season, I think, is a massive opportunity for us. I'm not sure whether we'll get top half, top 8, top 6, but it's a big opportunity because those other clubs are going to be running on empty by November, December.
I'm really happy to throw ignorance towards what is going to be a growing opportunity for clubs in international club football. Do you really care about playing? Take away the money, which is obviously at the front and centre for everybody there, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
If you are playing arse end of nowhere FC to go and win a few million quid, then absolutely you're going to go and take it. You know, it'd be contradiction towards me to say that I wouldn't want Everton to go and do that because it's beneficial to us. But I'm happy, like Roger said there, and it's quite sad that it's possibly an old-fashioned look at the way things should be, the way things we should always be looking at domestic football. If you qualify for European competition, then it's our confederation that we're always in a European competition that is Europe. Europe is the pinnacle of football. That's a debatable argument because you'd always want to win the league. I mean, league versus Champions League. You look at that lot over there. It's more important for them to win the Premier League than it would if you were to ask them, would you rather win the Premier League or the Champions League? It'd be the Premier League, given how long it's been since they went and did that. And I'd be delighted if things just stay like that. And the ignorance is indeed bliss for all of this. Going back to going full circle to what we originally said, it'd be fantastic. And it'd be a real lesson if these teams started really slowly and they were absolutely fucked starting this season. It's not going to happen because, like I say, Chelsea have got that many players. They're going to start with a top-class side when they begin the season. But, therein lies the problem itself, that they're allowed to go and do that too. So the have-nots there is spot on. And I feel that some of the players, I mean, it's ridiculous. And like you're saying, Les, there's some PFA stuff I'm not a massive fan of course, who've said some things that make sense. And the fact that you were able to go and try and sign players, because there's been like essentially a mini transfer window, and then the main one comes in at the end of this month. These guys desperate to go and get signings in to take them over to the States and blood them into these competitions. So the thing you'd add on to that is where most squads like us and having their break, wherever they are, they come back in, we start training, we start friendlies. You're getting, Keep the Lap, let's say, is the example. He's going there and he's going to be knackered when it comes to the start of the new season. And like Roger said then, I'm all for it. Go and play every night, every day, lads. Go and try and sell your T-shirts, whatever you want to go and do that, because it will come back to them at some point. And players that they've gone and paid a lot of money for as well. 30 million. Look how many players there that City already signed. City have spent over 100 million so far.
So 3 good players, though, to be fair.
Oh, I mean, yeah, but that's a sad thing. We can't deny that they go and spend ridiculous amounts of money on top quality players. I mean, that's, again, sadly, that's where you want to be, and that's where you need to be to succeed in the game these days. So, we're looking into this here with quite definitely a negative tone towards what it does against clubs like ourselves who are trying to do it the more conventional way. I find at a level of progress by doing it in modern day football. And look, we don't want to sound like, it's Everton, we're high and mighty and we don't do things wrong. Far from it. We've spent years talking about how shit Everton have been for various reasons. Nobody's sitting here saying, well, Everton wouldn't go and do that because we're better, we're more, we're a better club in regards to how we treat fans and all that sort of thing, which, elements of it are true. But you get to this point now, it's really sad. But if you offered that to our owners, what's going on now, particularly in the States, of course, because they're from there, they bite your hand off to go and do this. Yeah. And that's what's really sad for me, the way it is for your average fan as well.
Yeah, I do like that way of thinking, though, that although it does widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots financially, I think as we saw last season, there are inroads to be made just by being a sort of half-decent Premier League team. Like, say, Crystal Palace, you can go out and win stuff. Newcastle the same, going out and win a trophy against Liverpool, qualifying for Champions League. That middle part of the table, it's kind of there for the taking, isn't it? And if you can get a good cup run like last season, whereby a couple of teams get knocked out early, so there's a little bit of an easier way through. Let's say you're still gonna have to play the good teams at some point normally, but it just eases that way through to sort of having a good cup run, which then builds momentum. So I do like that way of looking at it. That maybe we should look at this as an opportunity, because if we can have a normal pre-season, get some players in, give them a full pre-season, we should be hitting the season ready to go again. As I've said before, hopefully we won't write off August. But we will look now at Everton's potential transfer window. So, Rod, as you said, you sent that list of players. It's 16, 2 of which, though, are Seamus Coleman and Nathan Patterson, who I can't see getting much game time if they're still at the club. So that's 14 players. 2 strikers, Beto and Chimiti, because obviously Calvert-Lewin's contract's not been sorted yet. It's pretty threadbare, isn't it? It feels like with the pre-season obligations coming up, we've probably got it feels like you never do any business when you're at these like tournaments like we're in America. So it's going to be either side of that the business is done. If we take it for granted that no one's going to come in before the 1st of July, there's a lot of work to be done there, isn't there, in a sort of a pretty short time frame?
There is. I mean, the squad is Pickford in goal, so we haven't got a backup keeper, apparently. Mm-hmm. We've got 3 centre-backs, Tarko and Branthwaite, Jake O'Brien. Well, we need 4. We've got 3 full-backs, 2 of whom are Coleman and Patterson. We've only got 4 midfielders, according to this, which I find very scary. Idrissa, Jimmy Garner, Irabunam and Harrison Armstrong. The latter 2, played 10 games, 10 appearances between them last season.
Well, Harrison Armstrong, I have a feeling he'll go on loan again anyway, to be honest. He had a really good loan at Derby, didn't he?
He's not starting. He's not a starter. The strongest area is this sort of attacking midfielder area. McNeil and Dye and Charlie Alcaraz. So the 3 of them, and that's fine. But yeah, we need a backup keeper. We need a right back. We probably need another backup full back. We need another midfielder or 2. And we need somebody else to challenge Beto. I don't see Chimiti doing that in the short term. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. Do we know anything about this James Smith character coming back? Do we know? Because that sort of made me a bit alarmed when they said he's on gardening leave. You know, he's leaving Man City and he's on gardening leave. Well, why? I mean, why can't he just start immediately? Well, the gardening leave's going to be up at the end of the transfer window, is it, or something? What? I don't understand.
That would be the most That would be the most Everton thing ever, wouldn't it? That would be the most Everton thing ever.
But it seems like he worked with Moyes first time around, and he's obviously had some good exposure at City. So good that he's coming back, and we're not just relying on Angus Kinnear and his Hammond organ there on the side. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do. And I just read another piece in the paper this morning about Brentford, who I fear for losing a couple of their very best players and having lost their manager. But they have a database of how many was it? How many were in that database?
Wasn't it?
They have a database of 85,000 players.
Yeah.
I wonder how big ours is. Yeah.
8.5.
Yeah, you have to plan, don't you? They plan windows, 3 or 4 windows ahead. And yeah, I'm anxious. I'm impatient, aren't we always? But we do have a very small squad, and we need to make some signings.
Yeah.
And we have a compelling argument. We don't have European football. We've got a shiny new stadium, and we've got a good manager, and we've got some exciting players in the squad. That there's I think 6 or 7 of our starters are they're quite exciting. Obviously Jake O'Brien and Branthwaite and Pickford and Dye, Alcaraz. These are exciting players. Idrissa starting lineup. So what do we say? Maybe 6, 7, 8 of the starting lineup is kind of in. But there's massive holes elsewhere.
Interesting. You mentioned the stadium there. What you were saying, Roger. Do you think the stadium can be sold to new signings? Do you think players incorporate that into who they think they're going to go? They're going to sign for? Because I don't think it would have been the case with the lap.
No, but it has been. I've been critical of the club's propaganda, and I will continue to be, because it is propaganda. It's not open, honest communication, and it is still a piece of nonsense that we're sort of waiting for the fixtures to come out on Wednesday to find out whether we're going to be playing a home game anytime soon. But yes, it should be. It depends who we're talking about, right? If you've got offers from City or Arsenal or Chelsea or wherever, then we can't really compete with that. But if you've maybe got, West Ham are interested in you, maybe Brentford are interested in you, maybe Crystal Palace are interested in you, then the club and the ambition of the new owners demonstrated that the new stadium completion and the plans they have should be a draw for a young, ambitious player to come and make a name for themselves. Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's necessarily the be and end all, but it could and should make a difference to. It shows what we're about, and it's that this is the new Everton, whatever that even means, of course. But it should be something that we use as leverage when it comes to the negotiating table. But you're still going to have to meet the personal terms, going to have to pay the wages, and going to have to convince them that they'll do well for their career coming to Everton. And those are the kind of players we need, the young up-and-comings, not the 30-somethings looking for a... We don't need Soufal from West Ham, do we? Looking for a final payday? Come on. Surely we can find young players.
Well, that's the main problem, isn't it? And you're right. I think I'm getting, by the day, I'm getting a little bit more paranoid about this, especially with that. I mean, as soon as you sent that list into the WhatsApp group, I was like, I'm going back to bed. Because I was just like, not another summer of this, not another summer of us going to a dreaded deadline day. We've spoken about it, I've hinted about it a couple of times, getting to deadline day, still looking around and stupid bloody yellow ties and all that, trying to find new players, and everything linked to this, linked to that when they're not really. All of that would be an absolute nightmare. And I think going back to your point there on the new stadium, I didn't particularly think about it in the way you have there. But I mean, us as fans are getting to a stage this summer, if we're still waiting to sign players, which we will be, Everton aren't going to go out there and sign 4 or 5 players in the space of a couple of weeks, or I wouldn't think so. I'd love to think so, but I don't think it's going to happen. And you then get into a stage where you're like, isn't this a crying shame that we haven't gone and signed these players when this is meant to be the dawn of a new era, when we've got a new stadium like this? And like, I think you go back to it, Roger, from well, certainly in the last couple of weeks, what we've sort of discussed is, are you putting your faith into the way this football club is changing? Are we able to do so? Most of our listeners will know that I'm a very pessimistic person. I will only put my faith into people that I'm able to see. Sadly, we can't do that. We don't know if the people we're getting in are going to be efficient enough to go and build an alarming lack of players that we have. Every season we seem to be saying this is the biggest window we've ever had. This is the biggest window we've ever had. I think that falls into that category when you've only got 16 lads there and a couple of them have been out on loan or are about 12 years old.
Yeah, I think I just think on the way the club's going, and hopefully, we spoke about this last week that we don't really know who's in place where or when people are coming in. But I would like to think that they're getting people in place now to, although we've said we'd like Moyes to have a big hand in the recruitment process and identifying and signing the players, would like to think that that's already underway with Moyes and has been since last season. And basically, it's not going to be on him to negotiate the transfer deals, sort out the players like he did first time round a lot of times, while we're going through pre-season. So if we look at, if we say we're not going to sign any players till July 1st at the earliest, because that's when the PSR thing ends or starts again or whatever, there's 2 weeks until pre-season, which kicks off at Accrington on July 15th. We're then pretty much back-to-back games, including the trip to America, until August the 3rd, which then leaves 13 days until the season starts. So you've got 2 little windows either side of pre-season. But if the club do it right, there's no reason why Moyes can't take all that pre-season and everything's going on in the background. And if we can do that, I think that'll take a hell of a lot of pressure off, and it should be fine, because there's like you say, there's a lot of players to buy there. There's a lot of positions to fill. Nothing coming through from the teams below the first team. But I'd like to think, and being a little bit optimistic there, that the club have got this in hand, and we can sort of go through that process while this tournament's going on, while we're doing pre-season, and integrate players right along the way.
I'm sure they think they have, Les. I'm sure they think they have. And I'm sure there are plans. Nobody's saying that they're all sat there twiddling their thumbs, or Moyes is there on his all-inclusive sunbed in Mauritius or wherever he is. No, I think there is a plan. But the difficulty is, even look at Brian and Bomo, right? There's this tug of war going on between Spurs and Man United for him. And that whole process is going to take a couple of weeks. Now, he's going to be 60, 70 million pound as a player, and he's going to be an absolutely vital cog in either the Man United machine or the Spurs machine. And at some point, you're going to have to find, plan A with him and plan B without him. So we are going to be having to, we can have our list, but there'll be good players, and there'll be other clubs in for those players. So, just because you think you've got a grip, it's only when we start seeing players over the line. And that's what Dave's point about how will we say come to us rather than Palace or Brentford or even Bournemouth, God forbid. Look at them. They've gone and signed a replacement left back before they've binned off Kirkhouse to Liverpool. Look at Brentford. They've gone and signed Kelleher just before they got rid of Flecken. You know, this is planning, this is organisation. And my faith, given the experiences we've had in the last 10 years of Everton, is that, you know, the best laid plans tend to fall apart. Let's hope this is different under the new people, because they have a blank slate.
We've got sorry, Les.
One possible mitigation for that, though, is the PSR thing, that we can't really sign anyone before June 30th. So I guess we won't know until next month. I don't know. I'm kind of speculating.
I think we've got headroom. I think we've got headroom already, and you know, I don't think we're talking about splashing 100 million on anyone, are we? I think we've got some headroom to be making 15, 20 million pound signings on 5-year deals that are going to be that's effectively 20 million, 5 years, 4 million, £1 million on wages. It's only 5 million. I think we've probably got a good 20, 25 million of headroom within PSR, but I'm not Kevin Maguire.
Yeah, I mean the one thing as well.
Before the end of June.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's all well and good sitting here thinking, well, it doesn't open until that point. Well, let's face it, it virtually does, doesn't it? I mean, you've got deals in hand right now. We basically just got to wait until the stroke of midnight before the window is officially open, and then they're going to go and sign it. That's the way things are there. And I'd like to think that this new version of Everton that we're talking about have done that sort of thing and are doing their homework before they're able to go and do that. Of course, that's when things can go wrong traditionally. You know, we spoke in our WhatsApp group about players that we thought we'd already had done the tour of Goodison, and then lo and behold, they've gone and signed for somebody else. But one thing that
they expected us to pay the tax bill. Do you remember him?
Yeah. Or I'm sure that we're talking about pinning our hopes on people. I'm doing that with our manager, because and I don't think we've put too fine a point on this, Moyes wasn't ever a manager that was pretty open about what the club needs to do, about players and, you know, potential ongoings. But he's come out several times talking about there's money there. He came out, what will always stick in my mind here is on the final day at Goodison, he came out to talk to Gethin Jones, and he said, I hope the owners are watching. And I didn't think he meant that in a sentimental way, in terms of, wow, look at what a football club we are, because all the fans here and the way in which how historic that final day was. I like to think, and what I've taken from that is that he's looking at it thinking, you've got to maintain what you've got here. You've already got something there with a structure in place that you can start growing. And the way in which he's spoken about there is money there, there would have been rehearsals, obviously, from you know, Belly, whatever it is people told him to do with Wazza and all that sort of thing. But Gethin Jones, who's like a professional broadcaster, he would have been told what questions he was allowed and allowed not to ask. For him to say to David Moyes things where he was able to reply and talk about, there's going to be a positive future here, we want you at the new stadium. He's not the type of man that pays lip service to stuff. So I would like to think, keep on saying that, I think that David Moyes knows what he's got to play with. And he seems pretty confident and content with what he can go and spend. He doesn't come out and say those things lightly. We're going to go and get players. We've got money to spend. There is money to spend. He's come out, that's not verbatim, but he's come out and said those things. That is what I'm pinning my hat to, because he's never been a man who's done that in the past. Yeah,
and he did seem quite intent on the Liam Delap thing, that was serious as well, didn't he? So,
well, I was honest, Les, as well, and that's what I appreciate. We're saying we're a bit behind the black ball, given that what everybody else is, what level they're at with their clubs. You know, we've gone out there, we've said, look, set our stall. This is what we've got. Come and join us. Naturally, sadly, these days they're going to go to the biggest, the highest bidder. But you mentioned, Roger, I think it's a really pertinent point that you made there. There are so many clubs that are in the same pool battling for players in this division now. You've got, I think, at least half a dozen You talk about your Brentfords and your Palace and all that sort of thing. But if you're a player, you look at that Premier League, you see how Everton were post-Christmas, you're thinking that's a player that's a club on the rise. That's a club that look like they've settled themselves. There are many clubs we're talking about here who potentially have PSR issues that we've sort of been able, thankfully, to put to one side without too much damage. And they will have to go and address that, and that'll where they'll be looking over the shoulders. If you think about it, Everton are in a good position here to go into the market. Obviously, you compete with everybody else, which is the asterisk behind every player's potential. It's like when you're going on Football Manager, isn't it? You try and sign a player, you'll get another club who'll come along and try to sign that player as well. That's the way things work. If Everton do that rightly, then we should be able to get efficient gang of lads in there who are able to continue the progression we've had since Moyes came back.
I was having a discussion yesterday with my boys about the Premier League next season, and we tend to do these stupid competitions: top half, bottom half, or top six, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And this was the top half I came up with. Now you're not going to disagree with Liverpool, City, Arsenal, Chelsea, Villa, Newcastle, top six, right? They won't necessarily be the top six, but all of them will finish in the top half. So that's 6 places gone. I don't think either United or Spurs will be as bad. So I think they'll scramble into the top half, right? So that's 8 spaces left. And I actually then put Brighton and Palace in. Okay. So that's the top half. And we're not in it. In that. And then in the bottom half, I've got, and these aren't positions, right? But the bottom half of the table is then Everton, West Ham, Fulham, Bournemouth, Brentford, Forest, Wolves, Leeds, Burnley, Sunderland. Right, so there's not a lot of room in the top 6. Very little room in the top 6. There's very little room in the top 8, and there's maybe a couple of slots in the top 10. And so, if you take Brighton, Palace, Everton, Fulham, Bournemouth, Brentford, Nottingham Forest, I think that's the league we're in, and therefore, we're sort of 8th to 15th, and that's a massive difference, right? And I think if you look at the last league table, was it like 3 points between 8th and 12th? Yeah. That's all, between Bournemouth, Fulham, Palace, and it's so tight, right? Forget the big boys, the top 6. I don't think we can get into the top 6. That's impossible. I know they've all got Champions League football, and maybe Man United will continue to be shy, and that'll be really funny. And maybe Spurs will also be shy, which will be even funnier. Which that frees up 2 slots in the top 10. So it's tough, right? Getting it. You can say all you like about the promoted teams finding it difficult to stay in the league, but when we are competing with the Bournemouth, Brentford, Fulham's, Palace, Forest, Brighton of this world, that we've got to finish above all of them to finish in the top 8, and that's how it's changed. Who's our peer group? It's a big peer group, and it's difficult to get to the top of it.
Yeah, it is. Everybody's battling for the highest place of those that are in that relative, group of teams you mentioned there. And I think you're spot on the way you've said it. I think with our fans as well, and emphasize people getting in touch. What you would take as a season for us that indicates we're still progressing. I've said for quite some time, and I think you'll agree with me to a certain extent, perhaps, that I'd absolutely take the most boring, mundane 10th place season, given the absolute shower of shite we've had for several years. It looks like we've got onto a relatively safe plateau now. Now I think you'll get a lot of our fan base will be saying, wow, now's the time to go for it. New stadium, being able to sign players. I don't know. I'm reluctant to sort of press the button on that because there are a lot of things that are new to the football club. We've got a lot of new individuals there who are behind the curtain and who aren't necessarily football people as well. And I have great faith in the new ownership for now until we see what goes on with movements at the club. But to me, and I'd ask you guys what you think would be a satisfactory position now. Would you take slightly better than the 13th we ended up falling into? Because I think the easy thing to say, and many people will, is that look how well we've done under Moyes. We would be a top 8 side with Moyes if you just doubled up the half of the season that he's had with us. It's obviously not that simple to say so. Well, it's simple to say it, but it's not simple enough to do. I just wonder where you guys are in thinking, and this is new players notwithstanding, is a sufficiently decent Everton season? Would you take where we were relatively comfortable for a third of the season?
We'll go into this in more depth next week when the fixtures are out and stuff. But we'll just quickly go through this before we finish. Then, I think, given the fact that we're essentially a mid-table club now, we finished on 48 points twice, 2 seasons running in real terms. Points deductions notwithstanding, that gives you a pretty solid mid-table platform. The first season we did it with Dice with the 8 points off, so we finished on 40. There was a lot of shit going on behind the scenes. On a relatively even keel last season behind the scenes, the takeover happened. It was still a bit messy, the new manager coming in and stuff like that. Finished on a relatively, sort of looked like a stable club. Should take that into next season. Like Roger said, though, that mid-table is very, very condensed. The top, like you said, Roger, the top 6 feels a little bit out of bounds because there's a big gap between Brighton and 8th, let's say, and down to mid-table, or 6th, let's say 6th. There's 10 points between 6th and 9th. There's quite a lot to make up there.
Yeah,
but I think a top half finish isn't beyond us. But like Roger said, it's going to be tough because of those teams who are doing well in those positions now. Fulham, Bournemouth, Brighton. I think Brentford maybe one to watch struggling next season. It feels like things could have come to a bit of an end there with Thomas Frank. Who knows though? Yeah, I'm gonna do the usual and go with 8th like I do every season. We want to finish 8th. Our rightful position. Rog, what do you reckon?
Well, yeah, I think 8th is difficult because I don't. Which of those 8 that I said would we finish above? Given that you're going to get a bounce back from United and Tottenham unless it's just hilariously funny and they remain being shit. Yeah, look at 8th Brighton, 61 points, and then there's a 5-point gap to Bournemouth, 56, Brentford, 56 in 10th, right? So you need 56 points to get the top half, 48 points we got. So the gap between us and Brighton was 13 points and we finished 13th, but we were 5 points adrift of Palace on 53. So that's that gap that I was mentioning was 56 to 53. So a 3-point gap between 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th. It's so congested. I'm not sure we're going to get more than, I think 55 points is the absolute maximum to get out of this team. And that probably puts you on the cusp of 10th, maybe 9th, maybe as low as 11th or 12th. I think it's going to be difficult. However, given that there's 6 teams in Europe, and given that there is still going to be huge competition for those Champions League qualification places, and you've got United and in the mix, just trying to punch back to what they see as a rightful position. Them teams, the top 6, top 7, are going to take points off each other. Okay. And we need to be beating the teams around us and clearly beating the teams at the bottom. But those big teams are going to take points off each other. So it may be that you'll finish slightly higher with mid 50 points. I don't know. I think we've got to be realistic. And I would, if you offered me 10th, I'd probably cash out at 10th. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all relatively agreed on that then. They're a mid-table finish. It's nice to look further than that. It's nice to look beyond. It's nice to look higher. But I think we need to be realistic because we have got to factor in the new ground as well, which will be a little bit weird for everyone.
Yeah, and a cup competition, Everton's route into the Champions League is via the Europa League, right? That's the only way we're going to do it. We're not going to finish top 5 anytime in the next 5 years, are we? I think it's highly unlikely. So Crystal Palace, obviously, if we get into the Europa League and Roma don't qualify as well, so we don't want that to happen. But yeah, let's see if we can get into the Conference League, win that, into the Europa League, win that, get into the Champions League. That's the route as we bounce up from 10th to 8th to 7th, and that's the plan.
Sam,
there's an old-fashioned way of this. It's sort of like you're coming up the rails when nobody really pays attention to it. And I think that there's a potential to that because you're right there. You've got so many sides there who are battling against each other, Roger. And with a 5th place getting into the Champions League, I think you're absolutely right. It's a long time before you see Everton competing for those positions as much as we love, and we're completely wrong saying that we won't. There's a reasonable argument to say nobody's really going to look at Everton here. And there's going to be a spotlight on us with the new stadium. but that's about it. You know, because I can't imagine either that the signings that people are going to look at and think, you know what, there's a marquee £40 million. Wow, Everton have signed that, and Everton coming back to the main big table and able to, you know, have a game of poker with everybody who are at the top. That again, that's not going to happen. So I think sort of from the mentality of all this as well is that, you know, you can go into this with a little bit of a free hand. Because
we've got to get off to a good start, though. I think it's important to get off to a good start. 3 or 4 wins out of the first 5 or 6 games, and then you're there, and then you're competitive.
Well, that's why the last 2 seasons. Sorry, Dave. The last 2 seasons, as bad as it's been, we've wasted August twice. We've written off August twice. We can't do that again.
And I know it's something we'll go into next week more, but it looks like I would imagine the first 3, maybe 4 games are away from home with Bramley-Moore still, you know, the paint's still not dry on Bramley-Moore. Would you be happy with that? Was that something that you'd force upon this? Because I'm sort of thinking, well, if you go and do that and take, say, let's take your first 3 away games out of your season, and, you know, it's a bonus if you go and win all 3, of course it is. But then you've got a lot of pressure then put onto Bramley-Moore, of course, because you're thinking if Everton didn't win in those first 3 games, you're going into the new stadium thinking, wow, you know, we're not used to this. None of us really know what it's going to be like. There's then, you know, you've got some pressure there, the albatross around your neck that you've got to go and win games early on in there. But I'm just thinking that could that play into our hands a little bit if you're putting those games on the side, particularly if they're the bigger sides, and thinking, do you know what? We'll sort of hold our. I'm talking about a lot of poker related content here, Annie. But you keep your cards against your chest and think, do you know what? I'll put my hand in right now when you've gone and got away from those early ones, away from home, and we're all desperate. We're all drooling in our mouth to get into that new stadium, and you know it's going to be fantastic, isn't it? And you get in our club there to a serious home side, and you mentioned the 50-odd points there, Roger. Got to take 3/4 of them at home.
We'll hold that for next week when the fixtures are out and we know where we're at. Really, we'll look into that along with what we think a good season looks like. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Cups, the lot, as we build up to this new season start. That's all for this week's Blue Monday. Cheers, Rog. Cheers, Dave. Thanks to everyone for listening. That's been Blue Monday. We'll be back at the same time next week. Up the Toffees.